Well, hey there, colleagues. How in the world are you doing? Student motivation is hopeless, right? Wrong. And in this video, I want to give you 3 reasons why it's not and 3 tips for doing something about it right now. Reason number 1. They want to be motivated. They're on our side in this area. There's not a single student that you teach that wakes up and thinks, I really hope that I can be as demotivated as possible today. That's what I'm after. That's not a thing that happens. Here's an excerpt from the prologue of The Will to Learn. You've never met a student who set out to become demotivated in school. Every one of your students down in the roots of their wills desires to learn. That word desire is important to contemplate. It comes from the Latin desiderare, with D connoting from within, deep down, and sedere meaning from the stars. That's a weird word, right? Etymologists think that originally the word meant something like to await what the stars will bring. Let the word's beauty sink in. Then look out on your classroom and see, deep in those eyes looking back, an unyielding desire, and a waiting of what the stars will bring. The point, your students want to be in your class. They want to do the work of learning. They would prefer that. Trust me, if for no other reason, believe what I'm saying, because student demotivation is painful. I want you to picture if I gave you the worst professional development day ever, 6 hours straight of brutally irrelevant, non-credible, confusing, vague, unattainable, ill-suited PD. It was just the worst. The content was bad. The presenters were bad. The way that they facilitated the learning was bad. Imagine I did that to you for a day, and then I did it for another day, and then I did it for a whole week, and then I did it for a whole school year. That's what's going on in the heart of a demotivated student. And I promise you, they do not want that to be what's going on. Reason number 2 that there's hope. Student motivation is malleable. So in this book, I talk about my 5 key beliefs theory for student motivation. It basically says that there are 5 key beliefs that when these are present in the heart of a student, they will want to do the work of learning. If you look for these things as mindsets or high effect size influences, you will find them all across our literature and in literatures outside of education. Now here's an excerpt about malleability from chapter 2 of my book. The research is clear. The 5 key beliefs move. They can shift in a week, in a month, in a year. They can shift for a week, a month, a year. A student can go from demotivated in science class in September to scheduling elective science classes in February. A student can think you're the worst teacher ever, and after a 5-minute conversation be back to finding you credible. This doesn't mean students are fickle, it means people are. And that's not a knock on people either. Gardens are fickle too, right? And beautiful and filled with life and good. Reason number 3, student motivation is not as hard to influence as we often make it out to be. The problem is not that student motivation is hard to influence. There's lots of studies that I write about in this book that show that you can change beliefs in a student's heart with very efficient methods. The problem is that we tend to overcomplicate our approaches to student motivation, or we all just do our own thing without a clear understanding of how that thing works. And so we end up expending a lot of needless energy getting results that could be better because we're just not deeply understanding the mechanics of this drive that we want our kids to have inside of their hearts. And so when I first was writing this book, I came up with 50 different strategies that I knew from myself, from other teachers, from the research, really help with cultivating one or more of the 5 key beliefs. But then I was sitting on an airplane at one point, just months before the book was due, and I said I have to restart the whole book because 50 strategies is way too much. 50 strategies is why we get so frustrated with student motivation, because we're basically throwing wet noodles at the wall, seeing if they stick, and that's not fun. So instead, I narrowed it down to 10 high leverage strategies, a few of which I'm going to talk to you about right now. Okay, so as promised, 3 tips for influencing student motivation tomorrow in class. Tip number 1, when it comes to credibility, the bottom of the pyramid of the 5 key beliefs, think about CCP, care, competence, and passion. You want to be signaling these out to any student whom you hope will believe that you are a good teacher. If you're under-signaling care, work on that. If you're under-signaling competence, identify an area where you're currently not very competent and focus on that. If you're under-signaling passion, try to find reasons that what you are doing is important. Analyze your lessons for fluff or dead space and get rid of that because the time that you have with your students is precious. Signaling CCP to individual students over time will result in them finding you a credible teacher. Not your favorite, we don't care about that. A credible one, a good one. By the way, I've got a course on teacher credibility. It's a mini course designed for busy teachers. You can see a link to that in the description. Tip number 2, probably the hardest and the greatest belief on the 5 key beliefs pyramid to me is the value belief. It's hard because here you're directly up against the culture at large. And if you're teaching in the United States or a culture like the United States, learning is not highly valued in our culture. Things like career or family or money, those are valued much more than just learning. So you're trying to help students to value the work of learning, not for the job they'll get someday, not for the money that it'll help them to make, but you're trying to help them to value it because it is good in and of itself, because it's beautiful, because it's exciting, because it's emancipatory and empowering, because it opens up an ability to see the world like otherwise you could not see. That's what you're offering with your students when you're trying to help them to value learning. Doing that, though, is really hard, right? So a strategy I talk about in the book, Strategy 4, is the mini sermon. It's a 30-second blurb where you just go for it with your students and you tell them why you believe that the work that they're doing in your class is important, is good, is valuable, is meaningful, is deep with purpose and significance. I go into greater depth on that in Strategy 4, but just this will work. Over time, if you do a bunch of these, you'll become more capable as a communicator about the value of what you teach. And your students, some of them will take what you say to heart. It will move them along the spectrum from unbelief to belief. And then finally, tip number 3, teach the effort that you expect. I like to ask teachers in my workshops, make a list of all the learning conducive behaviors that you would like your students to do. These can be very, very small, like writing their name at the top of the paper, to very, very large, like studying effectively for tests. And now, this list, these are mini lessons that need to be taught to your students. These are things that they need specific instruction on. They need modeling. They need examples and non-examples. For the really, really small stuff, you don't need to teach it a bunch of times. Once will typically do. When you do it, explain why you want it done, why you believe it's important, and then you just reinforce it. For the bigger ones, those are going to have to be taught multiple times. I teach my students to study for tests, how to study effectively all year long in all of my classes because it's something that's appropriate for 9th graders to be struggling with, to be growing in their competency of. There you go, 3 reasons why I have a lot of hope about student motivation and why I think you should too, colleague. And 3 tips to start influencing student motivation right now. My last word, one last thing. Don't be a perfectionist about this. Give yourself grace. When you're doing this kind of work, it's the long-term results that you're after. You're not going to see magical overnight change, but you are making investments with this work into the hearts of young people, and you're cultivating strong and lush gardens of motivation in their hearts. Take care. I'll see you next time.